I'm Jeff McCausland, founder and CEO of Diamond 6 Leadership and Strategy. You know, when you think about leadership, the one thing leaders do that makes them different from any other person is they decide. And they also decide when they're going to decide. So in many ways, not only do they determine the path and the direction that their organization moves, they also manage the clock for their organization in terms of when they make decisions and choices. When you think about decision making, obviously one has to think about how I go through that. How do I make very difficult choices? And oftentimes when discussing that on the battlefield at Gettysburg, which we frequently use as a leadership classroom, I am taken by monumental decisions that were made by two men on the evening of the 2nd of July, 1863. Let me take you back there for a brief moment. It's the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, and so far it's been largely a draw, though the Confederates have been somewhat successful, tactically at least, on the first 2 days, though they have not scored a strategic victory at that point. Robert E. Lee is at his headquarters. He is somewhat frustrated because he thinks his subordinate leaders have not coordinated their actions well in the preceding 2 days. So that night, as he decides what is the Army of Northern Virginia going to do on the 3rd of July, he ponders that, but does so in largely isolation. He'll meet with a few staff officers, but largely keeps to himself to make that particular choice. As a leader making decisions, obviously there's an awful lot of information he might have drawn from. But he seems to stay to his own, and he doesn't have the benefit of perhaps the major item that might have given him information, that is his cavalry, who have not been to Gettysburg yet, and Jeb Stuart, leader of that cavalry, will only arrive very late that night. Let me take you to the other side of that field, about 1.1 miles from where Lee was sitting the same evening. George Meade, who's been in command only about 3 or 4 days, as opposed to Robert E. Lee, who had been in command for about a year and a half, will meet with all his corps commanders, and he'll take very serious input from them on the status of their troops, their morale, ammunition, food, water, how many wounded, all those items that one commander might find in a military situation to be critical. But Meade has one big advantage that Robert E. Lee does not have, and that is the Union Army had begun to develop an analytical group headed up by a colonel by the name of Sharp. What Sharp would do would be take disparate pieces of information, organize them using what we would call today rough matrices, and from those disparate pieces of information provide analysis and intelligence that his boss could do to make choices. And so George Meade will decide, after consulting with his leaders, that he will defend on the 3rd day at the Battle of Gettysburg. Robert E. Lee, who does not have the benefit of information from cavalry or anything like that analytical cell, will decide to attack on the 3rd day of the Battle of Gettysburg, the so-called Pickett's Charge. So what we see is two leaders making very, very difficult decisions in a crisis with a constrained period of time. One leader, the more experienced leader in fact, Robert E. Lee, will be making intuitive choices based on intuition, his feeling, his sense of the situation. George Meade, less experienced commander, only been in charge a handful of days, will be making informed decisions basing on information that he's received from his subordinates, very open feedback conversations, and finally the analysis provided by Colonel Sharp. So all leaders have to think, regardless of what they're leading, how do I gather information? How is that information analyzed? And how can I best, in constrained periods of time, make very informed decisions?